Alrighty, Daniel 8, the vision of the ram and the goat. We're going to go through the entire chapter of Daniel 8 in fairly excruciating detail, and this is going to be a very, very nerdy video, so if you're not into that, probably not the video for you.
Alright, let's get it started in here. Nerd!
But let's start with just an overview of what we're talking about. What is the vision of the ram and the goat? So this is a vision. It's the third major vision in the book of Daniel. And what happens in this vision is Daniel sees this ram, and it's got two horns. One horn is slightly bigger than the other, and it's going around and rampaging, and no other beast can stand up to it, and it's just having a good old time. And then out of the west comes this goat with just one single horn, and it defeats the ram. And just as the goat is in the height of its power and everything is great, that one horn breaks, and in its place, four more horns arise. And then out of one of those horns sprouts a little horn. And a lot is said about this little horn. It's said to represent something very bad, a very bad person who does all sorts of terrible things, both to the world and to Israel. And he's said to stop the temple sacrifices for a period of time and set himself up against, God himself and all of these terrible things. And the vision ends with these two angelic men discussing how long the temple sacrifices are going to be shut down for. And it is said that they're going to be shut down for 2,300 evenings and mornings. So if you've ever heard of the 2,300 evenings and mornings, that's this vision. That's what's going on here. So that's a lot. If you need to reread Daniel 8 or rewatch what I just said to kind of get all of that, that's totally fine, but I'll also be reiterating a lot of this as we go along. So here's our big questions for today. We've got, what does the ram represent? What do the ram's horns represent? It's interesting that the vision took time to describe one being higher than the other. That's probably important. What does the goat represent, and especially its horn? What does the breaking of the goat's horn represent? What do the four horns represent? What is the little horn? And what are the 2,300 evenings and mornings? Okay, so let's start with just getting our bearings of when and where this vision is taking place, because it's actually important for the context. So, as I said, this is the third of four major visions in the book of Daniel. There's some minor visions as well, like with the handwriting on the wall and when Nebuchadnezzar gets mad cow disease. I'm not making it up, that actually happens. But the basic timeline is King Nebuchadnezzar comes to power, and while he's in power, he receives the vision of the great image with the head of gold, the chest of silver, the torso of bronze, and the legs of iron. And that's actually important. That's going to come up in today's discussion. And then King Nebuchadnezzar dies. And then in that intermediary period between Nebuchadnezzar and when Cyrus comes in and captures Babylon, we get two more visions. The vision of the four beasts, which is where we get the Son of Man thing. And then this one, which is the vision of the ram and the goat. And then the Medo-Persian Empire comes in, captures Babylon, and Daniel's going to receive one final vision of the terrifying man. So lots of stuff going on around this historically, but we can actually get even more specific about this vision. We know not only when Daniel had it, but also where. Let me get my big ugly head out of the way. This map is courtesy of BibleMapper.com. I'd never heard of them until I researched this, but this is a fantastic map, so I'm very thankful for that. What's interesting is that Daniel was not in Babylon when he received this vision. He was actually in Susa, which would be the later capital of Persia. And he was in a specific place in Susa. He was in the citadel, and he was right next to what he calls the Ulai Canal, which seems to be some sort of hand-dug canal that ran right by the castle. The picture, then, that we get of Daniel's vision is not I was going to sleep and I saw this dream, but rather, I walked outside and I saw all these things that didn't seem quite right. This big goat and this big ram and these angels talking to each other, just kind of right in front of him on the banks of this canal, all happening, and he seems to be the only person that's seeing this. And that was probably part of what disturbed him, was that he kind of felt like he was crazy. So that's the kind of context of this vision. Okay, let's start with the ram. So the ram is said to have two horns. They're both high, but one is raised higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. That's a really bizarre set of details, but it actually describes the Medo-Persian Empire to a T. So The larger horn is Persia. The smaller horn is Media. Media is the older of the two empires. It was established first. Persia came up last. It was the later of the two empires. Persia started out as a tributary state under the Median Empire until Cyrus took Media by force, but left a lot of the people in charge. And so on paper, it was Cyrus's empire, but in practice, this was really two empires that had just basically agreed to work together. So the timeline looks like this. The Medes begin their big heyday when they capture Nineveh. Yes, that Nineveh. And during the heyday of Media, Persia exists as a tributary state under the rule of Media. And then Cyrus the Great conquers Media. And then they go in together and capture Babylon. And then that reign ends when Alexander the Great conquers Persia. This actually corresponds to the silver chest and arms of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. That is to say, the Medo-Persian Empire is the silver chest. Alexander the Great is the bronze, and we'll get to him in a second. So the ram is said to be basically going north, south, and west, and everywhere, and just conquering everything in its sight. And this is basically exactly what we see. This was what the Persian Empire looked like when Cyrus revolted and took control of the empire. This is what the empire looked like when Cyrus died. And it's only a 23-year period, assuming that I know how to do math. So fairly quickly, and really just took over the entire known world. And this is exactly what the vision says about the ram. No beast could stand before him, and no one was able to rescue him from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. Okay. Then we have this handsome fellow. This is Alexander the Great, the young man who decided that he wanted to conquer the world and walked outside and did it. And his empire is the male goat. And we get a very interesting detail about this goat, that he comes from the west and goes across the face of the whole earth. And that is exactly how Alexander took the Persian Empire. He started in Greece, which is out in the west. If you can see my mouse, it's right there. He started here, and he basically just took the entire world in chunks, going from west to east, absolutely destroying the Persian Empire as he went. So just this west-east, and just took everything in its path. Absolutely just insane. And in half the time that the Persian Empire took to build its empire. But the fascinating thing about Alexander the Great is that as soon as he conquers the Persian Empire, he dies. When he's in when he's in his prime, he's super strong, and he just dies. So the horn of the goat is Alexander the Great. And the breaking of the horn is his death. And so in his place rises 4 horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. In the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death, there was no clear heir left to take over for him. And so there began a massive power struggle for who was going to hold which parts of the empire, and basically just scattered the empire to the 4 winds of heaven. In the Bible, the number 4 is symbolic of the earth, because there are 4 points on a compass, but also in other ancient literature, it's really common for 4 to be the number of Earth, for the similar reason. So we can interpret these 4 horns as symbolic, referring to the fracturing of Alexander's domain to the 4 corners of the world, or we could pick 4 specific countries that it kind of breaks into: Syria, Greece, Egypt, and Asia Minor. This one's a little bit more iffy because, again, the power struggles really made it difficult to really nail down who was in charge of what and for when and for how long, at least until several years after Alexander died. But if you need 4 specific regions, then there you go. Now, out of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great, towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. As I said, one of the 4 regions we can kind of attribute to being one of the 4 horns-ish was Syria. And Syria is going to be, I posit, the horn out of which the little horn grows out of. But we kind of need a little bit more information about the little horn before we really can establish that. So here's the information we get about it. First, it comes at the latter end of the kingdom. So not right away. It actually takes quite a while before the little horn is going to sprout up. The second thing we know about it is that it's going to grow great. That is, it's going to wage war to the south, to the east, and to the glorious land. In Daniel, south means Egypt. It almost always means Egypt. East can mean a couple different things, and glorious land almost always means Israel. So we got a little horn. It's going to go attack Egypt. It's going to wage war in the east, and it's going to go attack the glorious land. It's going to go attack Israel. The little horn is going to rise up against the Prince of Princes, also called the Prince of the Host. It's going to take away burnt offering and overthrow the sanctuary. It's going to destroy many saints, and it's going to be broken, but by no human hand. That's a lot of clues, which is why most people think that Captain No's job here is the guy we're looking for. So this is Antiochus IV, and he is a piece of work if you've ever heard of one. We actually get more information about Antiochus IV in the book of Daniel itself. In Daniel 11, it goes through all the kings that are going to arise in this period, and we can name what each one of those kings were. And when we finally get to the king that is very apparently Antiochus IV, this is what Daniel says about him. It says, he shall speak against the God of gods. He's going to come into the glorious land. He's going to take away regular burnt offering. He's going to set up the abomination that makes desolate. Tens of thousands are going to fall by his hand, and he's going to come to an end with none to help him. Sound like the little horn? Yes, it does. So here's what we know about Antiochus IV historically. He leads military campaigns against Egypt, so he attacks the south. He fought to expand / defend his eastern border. He took a personal interest in Judea, especially in Jerusalem and especially in that temple. He ordered for the abolishing of the regular morning and evening burnt offerings in the temple. He set up a separate altar in the temple itself to Zeus. He styled himself Epiphanes, which means God manifest. So a lot of these kings during this time period would give themselves these nicknames, and he chose the name Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He killed a lot of people. He killed at least 40,000 Jews and sent at least 40,000 into captivity. And then he just dies very mysteriously while on a military campaign, and we really don't know what happened, but it was possibly due to disease or suicide. Maybe he went crazy. We really don't know. He's just very mysterious death. With all that in mind, let's look at the timeline we have here. We have a ram that is symbolized by Media Persia with its two horns that is takes over the entire world, that is then conquered by the goat with the one horn that is Alexander the Great. Then Alexander the Great dies, the horn breaks, and 4 horns rise in its place, symbolizing the scattering of the dominion of his empire to the 4 corners of the earth. And then after some time, during the latter reign of this new divided empire, a new king shows up, Antiochus IV, who does all these terrible things. He goes against Egypt, he defends his eastern border, he attacks Judea, he goes up against God, he calls himself God manifest, he kills many of the saints, and he's broken by no human hand, or at least seemingly so. Okay. So this is why a lot of scholars would put Antiochus IV as the little horn. But we have one more mystery here to solve, and that is the 2300 evenings and mornings. So here's the citation from Daniel here. For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? So this is one angelic being talking to the other. And he said to me, or to him, there's a textual variant there, for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. So what does this mean? So after 2300 evenings and mornings, the sanctuary is going to be restored, which means during this period, the sanctuary is not in its rightful state. What does it mean for the sanctuary not to be in its rightful state? Probably it has something to do with that there's no regular burnt offering and that there's some transgression that makes desolate. And that's what's going on for 2300 evenings and mornings. Now, there is more than one appropriate interpretation of this out there, but I wanted to give sort of what I think is one of the worst possible interpretations of this, and then give what I think is probably one of the best interpretations of this. So here is probably the worst interpretation of this you could possibly do. Meet William Miller, this absolute handsome devil. He believed that the 2300 evenings and mornings represented 2300 years. So we're looking at a 2,300 year period. And he decided that the start point of that was 457 BC. I can't remember exactly why, but it was an important date. And then if you count forward from that, then the end point would be 1844. And Miller believed that Jesus would return in 1844. He, in fact, did not return in 1844. So people were really disappointed about that, but people still liked him and liked a lot of his theology. And so out of Miller's theology grows the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they try to reinterpret his prophecies in different lights to kind of justify it. Maybe he meant something different by it or whatnot, but yeah, it's a whole nightmare there. Let me posit a better way to interpret this. Again, not saying this is the only correct way to interpret it, but I think it's a much better way. So if we're trying to figure out how long is 2,300 evenings and mornings, I'm going to posit we're looking at 1,150 days. Because we're talking about the morning and evening sacrifice contextually in this passage. And so we have 1,150 skipped evening sacrifices, and then we have 1,150 skipped morning sacrifices. That means that is a total of 2,300 skipped sacrifices, right? Or 1,150 days. If you're not buying that, stick with me. It'll make sense in a minute. So let's go back to Antiochus IV here and get a little bit more detail. In 175, he assumes power. And in 169, that's when he starts his assault against the glorious land, and he loots the temple and takes all the pretty stuff for himself. And then these last three dates are very, very important. So somewhere in the fall of 167 BC, Antiochus IV issues a decree demanding that the temple shut down their regular morning and evening sacrifices. We don't know exactly when, but we know that it was before December 6th, 167 BC, because he was in the temple doing terrible things on that day. But we also know it could not have been early on in 167 BC because he was busy doing other things. So at some point in the fall, late 167 BC, Antiochus is shutting down the regular burnt offering. On December 6th, he sets up the abomination, the altar to Zeus. That comes up in other visions we'll deal with later. And then on December 14th, 146 BC, Antiochus just dies mysteriously on a military campaign. And that very same year, almost at the same time really, the Maccabees recapture Jerusalem and reinstitute the regular burnt offering. Now, I'm going to just kind of pull a number out of thin air. This is going to be the last time I'm going to ask you to be patient with me and work with me here. Once I make the connection, it'll be justified. So the number I'm going to pull out of thin air here is October 20th, 167 BC. It's a good a guess as any when we're talking about when we think Antiochus shut down the temple sacrifice. It's a perfectly good, educated guess. Now, the reason why I'm going to put that guess forward is because if we, again, using modern reckoning, which is not how they reckoned time back then, and I know that, but if we use modern reckoning and then assume 365 days, that is exactly 1,150 days between the time that Antiochus shuts down the temple sacrifices and when they're reinstituted. Now, like I said, the ancients absolutely reckoned time a little bit differently than what we do today. So we need to allow for a little leeway in where we put the dates and whatnot. But the fact that the dates line up close enough, even with our modern reckoning, to be like, yeah, this works, is enough reason for us to be like, this is probably a plausible explanation for what could be going on. And that is what Antiochus does at the end of his reign. This is the last thing he does. He shuts down temple sacrifices, and he is struck down by God, I guess, while God resets up his temple. And this event is symbolized by the rock in the vision we saw with Nebuchadnezzar, which of course becomes the mountain by the working of Jesus Christ on the cross and the inauguration of the kingdom of God. So, again, final recap. Ram, Media-Persia, goat, Greece, four horns, the separating of his kingdom, the little horn, Antiochus. The 2,300 evenings and mornings are the skip sacrifices that Antiochus orders while he is reigning. And then he is broken by no human hand, and we look forward to Jesus, which is pretty awesome. So if you got to this point in the video, it probably means this information is helpful to you, and your support means a lot to me. These videos take an incredibly long time to make. What takes you 20 minutes to watch takes me 20 hours to put together, and I've got a full-time job and a family to take care of. So if you can show your support by subscribing and commenting any of your thoughts and comments, and then sharing this with anybody else who has questions about Daniel or other apocalyptic literature, I'd really appreciate it. God bless and have a good day.